My parents told everyone I died at birth, but I've spent the last 16 years living in our soundproof basement. They say I'm cursed because I'm a leap year baby who can only exist on February 29th. My parents told everyone I died at birth. I only get to exist one day out of every 4 years. The other 1,460 days, I disappear into a soundproof room beneath our house, fed through a slot in the door like an animal nobody wants to look at directly. They claim that if anyone sees me between birthdays, it'll curse the family, but I know the real story. I'm the affair child, the bad luck baby, the mistake that's only allowed to be real once every leap year. That room was my entire world before I could even crawl. A leap baby, the nurse had said. How special. Something in Mom's eyes went wrong right then. She'll only exist sometimes, she whispered to herself. That's perfect. That's the answer. Years later, I learned she'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had stopped taking her medication. Dad was drunk when they brought me home from the hospital. He was always drunk back then. But that day, he was drunk in the specific way that makes a man agree to anything. Mom laid out her idea while he nodded along, bourbon practically leaking from his skin. She's cursed, you understand? Our baby. But there's a loophole. Leap babies technically don't exist except on their actual day, so we hide her. She can't spread the curse if nobody sees her. Within a week, the room was finished. Soundproofing foam packed into every corner. A slot cut at the bottom of the door, just wide enough for a food tray to fit through. A small attached bathroom. A camera bolted in the corner so they could confirm I was breathing without having to actually face me. No windows anywhere, no light switch within my reach. Just a single bare bulb that clicked on twice daily for meals. I taught myself to track time by scratching lines into the wall 1,461 marks between each visit, each time the door cracked open, and Mom looked at me with eyes that almost passed for sane, whispering, "Today you're real, baby. Today you exist." My brothers had no idea I existed for years. Mason and Luke arrived 13 months after me, born on an ordinary day, a day that didn't curse anyone. They got upstairs bedrooms and birthday parties every single year. I tracked their feet through the gap beneath my door, listened to laughter over cartoons I'd never get to watch. Mom told them the basement held toxic mold one breath and you'd drop dead, she warned. But kids are kids. Mason discovered me when he was 7 and I was technically 8, though only 2 of those years had actually counted as birthdays for me. His ball had rolled down the stairs and he'd chased it, deaf to Mom's panic shouting. He pressed his face right up to the slot, and his eyes met mine through the gap. "There's a girl in here," he screamed. Mom yanked him away so hard I heard the slap that followed echo through the entire house. "That's not a girl," she told him. "That's an echo, a ghost. If you ever see it again, our whole family dies." She'd convinced herself of her own lie completely. The isolation wasn't even the worst part. Worse was hearing an entire life happening just above my head without me in it. Birthday songs drifting down through the floor while I sat in pitch darkness. Christmas mornings, the crinkle of wrapping paper somewhere over my ceiling. Mom's better days, when the medication actually worked and she'd bake cookies. The smell sneaking through the vents while I choked down cold rice through my slot. Dad attempted something once. I recognized his shuffling steps, how he lingered outside my door for what felt like hours. "Linda," he slurred at Mom. "This isn't right. She's still our kid." Mom's voice snapped sharp, the same edge that always preceded her worst episodes. "Our kid? Our kid? You want this curse loose in our house? You want Mason and Luke dead because you're too weak to keep them safe?" Those shuffling footsteps never returned. I taught myself to read using whatever books Mom occasionally tossed through the slot, always something about curses, demons, protective rituals. By age 10, I probably understood schizophrenia better than half the doctors out there. I knew Mom's rhythms when the voices crept in, when she'd pace the floor above muttering about the curse seeping through the boards. I knew Dad drank harder on her bad days. I knew my brothers had simply learned to act like I didn't exist at all. The 29th of February 2020, my 4th birthday, 12 years old by calendar count, but only 4 actual birthdays to my name. Mom opened the door and I squinted against the hallway light like something nocturnal. She'd hung streamers, blown up balloons, baked a cake with 4 candles stuck in it. "Today you're real," she sang, manic energy buzzing off her. "Today the curse sleeps." Mason and Luke cowered behind Dad, terrified of the basement, ghost their own mother occasionally admitted was real. I tried to speak but had nearly forgotten how. When your vocabulary only gets exercised once every 4 years, words come out wrong, foreign in your mouth. "Hi," was all I managed. Luke burst into tears. "Make it go away," he whimpered. "It's scary." Every ounce of hope I'd built across 1,461 days collapsed in that instant. Even on the one day I was supposedly real, I still wasn't real to them. Maybe it was the darkness, the starvation, the endless quiet eating away at me. I'd seize on the bare concrete floor sometimes, completely alone, biting clean through my own tongue with no one there to help. Mom would watch through the camera feed, scribbling notes. "The curse is pushing back," she'd murmur to herself. Dad would carry extra bourbon to bed on those nights. I started scratching desperate notes onto cardboard scraps with my fingernails and sliding them under the door. "Please help me. I'm dying. I won't curse anyone." Mason found one once. I heard him sounding the words out slowly through the door. Then Mom's footsteps. Her scream. The click of a lighter. She burned every scrap while lecturing him that demons write fake notes specifically to trick children into opening doors they shouldn't. Once, state officials showed up. Someone had reported screaming coming from inside the house. Mom flashed her medicated pleasant smile and gave them the full tour. By then, the basement door had been painted over, wallpapered, hidden completely behind a bookshelf. "Just the 3 of us and the boys," she chirped sweetly. The social worker wrote down notes about the clean house, the happy family, the well-adjusted children. Nobody ever came back to check again. The 28th of February, 2024. My 5th birthday was tomorrow. 16 years old, but only 5 birthdays would ever count. I could hear Mom pacing upstairs, off her medication again, mumbling about leashed curses and demon children. Then the sound I'd dreamed about for 5,843 days straight, a key turning in the lock. Mason had swiped it from Mom's jewelry box. The door swung open and I stumbled forward, legs barely able to hold my weight. Mason's face drained of color as he stared at me, the stolen key still clutched in his fist. My knees buckled and I caught myself on the doorframe, every muscle screaming after years of total disuse. The hallway in front of me stretched out like an impossible distance to cross. Carpet, soft beneath bare feet that had only ever known cold concrete. Can you walk? Mason whispered, eyes flicking nervously toward the stairs. Mom's pacing upstairs had gone silent. That silence felt far more dangerous than her muttering ever had. I opened my mouth to answer, but my throat felt scraped raw. Instead, I took one trembling step, then another. Mason reached toward me to help steady my balance, then yanked his hand back, still half convinced of the curse he'd been raised to fear. Nothing about the house matched the pictures I'd built in my head all those years, listening to life unfold above me. Reality was smaller, dingier. Family photos covered every wall, 3 smiling children in each frame. The 4th child existed only behind a locked basement door, surgically removed from their carefully staged story. A door creaked somewhere upstairs. Mason's eyes went huge and he practically threw me toward the kitchen. "Hide," he hissed. "She's coming." I half collapsed behind the refrigerator just as Mom's footsteps hit the staircase. My pulse was so loud in my ears I was certain she'd hear it from across the room. Through the narrow gap between the fridge and the wall, I watched her come down the stairs, hair wild, nightgown stained with something old. "Mason?" Her voice carried that sharp edge that meant the voices were active again. "What are you doing awake?" "Just getting water," he said, shifting his body to block her line of sight into the kitchen. Mom's eyes went narrow. She shoved past him, nostrils flared like she could literally smell me nearby. "Something's off. The balance is wrong. The curse is on the move." She marched straight toward the basement door. Every muscle in my body locked up. Within seconds, she'd discover the empty room, the open door, the missing prisoner. Mason trailed after her, hands trembling. Her scream when she found the empty room shook the windows in their frames. "No, no, 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 no." She spun on Mason, fingers digging into his shoulders. "What did you do? What did you do?" "Nothing. I didn't do anything. The curse is going to take you. It'll take all of us." She shook him hard enough to whip his head back. "Where is it? Where's the demon?" Dad's heavy boots came pounding down the stairs. "Linda, what the hell is going on? It's loose. The thing got out. We're all going to die." I shrank smaller behind the fridge, watching Dad take in the scene, his bloodshot eyes drifting from the open basement door to Mason's terror to Mom's full manic spiral. For a brief second, I actually thought he might step up and do something. Instead, he grabbed the bourbon bottle off the counter. "We have to find it." Mom let go of Mason and began pacing the room. "Before midnight. Before the leap year officially starts. If it's loose when its birthday hits, the curse becomes permanent, locked in forever. Mom, please." Mason's voice cracked. "She's not a demon. She's just the slap cut through the kitchen air. Never call it she. It's a thing. A curse. A mistake that should have died 16 years ago." I bit down hard on my own knuckles to keep from making a sound. Every single word cut deeper than years of isolation ever had. At least down in that basement, I could still pretend that somewhere, somehow, they loved me, that fear had kept them away, not hatred. Mom yanked a flashlight from a drawer. "Check everywhere: the attic, the garage, the shed. It can't have gotten far. Look how weak and pale that thing is. It probably can't even make it past the property line." She wasn't wrong about that part. My legs already ached from the short trip upstairs alone. 16 years of darkness and starvation had left me with all the physical strength of a sick toddler. But I had something they hadn't planned for 16 years of nothing to do but listen, learn, and plan. I knew Mom's patterns better than she knew them herself. Dad took another swallow of bourbon and shuffled toward the back door. "I'll take the shed." "Take Luke," Mom ordered. "He needs to learn what happens the second we let our guard down." "Linda, the boy's asleep. Get him up." Dad trudged back upstairs while Mom kept up her frantic sweep closets, behind furniture, under every table in the house. Mason stood frozen in the middle of it all, guilt written across his entire face. Something about how Mom kept flipping between calling her own daughter "it" and "baby," all in the same breath, felt wrong in a way that went beyond just the illness decorating with streamers one minute, torching handwritten notes the next. What exactly was driving these violent mood swings? When Mom disappeared into the laundry room, Mason darted over to the refrigerator. "Get upstairs," he whispered into the gap where I was crouched. "My room's second door on the left. Hide under the bed." I shook my head. The stairs may as well have been a mountain range in my current state. "You have to. She's going to check here next." He was right about that too. Mom's search had a predictable rhythm: kitchen, living room, dining room, then back to the kitchen for a second pass. I had maybe 3 minutes. I forced myself out from behind the fridge. Every step felt like wading through wet cement. The staircase loomed ahead 15 steps, separating me from either freedom or recapture. I gripped the railing and dragged myself upward, one brutal step at a time. Partway up, I heard Luke whining sleepily as Dad pulled him out of bed. "Why do I have to look for ghosts? Just listen to your mother." But there's no such thing as Mom's voice sliced through his complaint. "This is life and death, Luke. That thing living downstairs is loose right now. If you see it, don't make eye contact. Don't believe a word it says. Just scream for me." My hand slipped on the railing. They were turning my own little brother into a hunter, and I was the prey he was being sent after. I reached the top of the stairs just as the search party headed for the back door. The hallway stretched ahead 4 doors, a lifetime's worth of unanswered questions. Which room belonged to which brother? What did a normal kid's bedroom even look like? Second door on the left, Mason's room. I pushed it open and nearly broke down crying. Posters wallpapering every surface. A computer perched on a desk. Shelves stacked with books. Everything I'd ever dreamed about, packed into one small, beautiful room. But there wasn't time to take it in. Mom's footsteps were already heading back toward the house. Under the bed, I found a graveyard of forgotten things: dust, lost socks, crumpled homework. I squeezed myself between boxes of old toys, trying to disappear entirely. The door burst open. Mom's flashlight beam raked across the room like a search spotlight. "I know you're in here," she sang in that sickly sweet voice reserved for her worst episodes. "I can smell the curse. 16 years of basement rot clinging to you." The beam swept inches from my face. I held my breath, flattening myself against the floor. A spider crawled over my hand, and I didn't dare twitch. Mason's been bad, Mom continued, checking the closet, letting demons whisper sweet nothings in his ear. But I'll fix him. I'll fix everything, just like I fixed your father back when he tried to go soft. She crossed to the window, testing the lock. You think you're so clever, don't you? Teaching yourself to read, writing your pathetic little notes. But you're nothing. A mistake. A curse wrapped in skin. And tomorrow, on your birthday, I'll make sure you never threaten my real children again. The flashlight swept beneath the bed. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for her shriek of discovery. Instead, Mason's voice rang out from downstairs. Mom, I think I found something in the garage. She bolted out, leaving me shaking in the dark. But I knew this was only round one. Mom wasn't going to stop until she found me. And when she did, I couldn't go there yet. Minutes ticked by. Maybe hours. Time felt entirely different up here, outside my basement cell. Eventually, exhaustion just won. 16 years of broken sleep on concrete had taught my body to rest anywhere, anytime. I woke up to sunlight pouring through Mason's window, my very first sunrise. The light turned everything gold. Beautiful. Terrifying. I'd missed 5,844 sunrises total, locked away while the entire world kept spinning without me in it. Voices floated up from downstairs. Ordinary voices. Breakfast chatter. The family eating together while Mom plotted my recapture. My stomach twisted with hunger. When had I last actually eaten? 2 days ago? 3? The food slot had been empty more and more often lately. Mom's strategy for weakening the curse ahead of my birthday. I needed to move. Find food. Find water. Find somewhere safer to disappear. But my body simply refused to cooperate. Every muscle screamed in protest at something as basic as climbing stairs. How did regular people make walking look effortless? The bedroom door cracked open. I tensed, ready to wedge myself deeper under the bed. It's just me, Mason whispered. He crouched down, peering into my hiding spot. You okay? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Mom's got everyone searching again after breakfast. She's saying if we don't catch you before midnight, we're all cursed forever. He slid a granola bar and a water bottle toward me. I'm sorry for everything. I should have let you out years ago. I grabbed the food with shaking hands, fighting the urge to inhale it like the starved animal they'd turned me into. The granola bar tasted like something out of a dream, sweet, crunchy, an explosion of flavor I'd never once experienced. She's spiraling, Mason went on. Dad's already wasted and it's not even 9 in the morning. Luke's too scared to come upstairs alone now. He stopped, studying my face in the dim light. You really do look like her, like Mom. Before the illness took over completely, I wanted to ask him everything, what she used to be like, whether she ever mentioned me, if anyone ever wondered about the screaming from the basement. But footsteps on the stairs cut us off. Mason scrambled up, kicking a dirty shirt over to better cover the gap under his bed. Stay quiet. I'll try to pull them away from the house. The door opened. Mom stood there, hair scraped back into a greasy ponytail, eyes scanning the room. Someone in here, Mason? Just me. She stepped closer, nostrils flaring. I smell it. That basement stink. It was here. Mom, please don't lie to me. She grabbed his arm, nails biting in. You let it out. You let the curse into our home. Do you want your brother dead? You want all of us to suffer for this? She's not a curse. Mason wrenched his arm free. She's my sister, your daughter. The slap sent him crashing into his desk. I have no daughter. That thing is a parasite, a demon wearing human skin, and if you can't see that, then you're infected too. She stormed out and slammed the door. Mason cradled his reddening cheek, tears streaking down his face. I wanted so badly to comfort him, to tell him none of this was his fault, but we both understood I couldn't risk moving an inch. The rest of the day dissolved into a blur of searching and yelling. Mom's voice grew increasingly frantic with each passing hour. Dad's slurred objections faded as the bourbon took full hold. Luke wouldn't stop crying, begging someone to explain why they were hunting ghosts. I finally crawled out from under the bed once darkness fell again, my legs stiff from hours of hiding, every muscle protesting the movement. The house had gone silent except for Dad's snoring from the master bedroom and the television murmuring in the living room. Mom would be glued to her shows, the demon possession ones, the spiritual warfare ones that fed straight into her delusions. Mason's door creaked open. He waved frantically for me to follow him into the bathroom. I limped after him, leaning on the walls for support. He cranked the faucet to cover our whispering and pulled out a backpack he'd stashed behind the toilet. Inside, clothes, a flashlight, some cash, more granola bars. He laid out his plan while I changed out of the filthy basement rags into jeans and a hoodie that swallowed my skeletal frame. He'd stage a distraction in the morning, buy me enough time to slip out the back door. There was a bus stop 3 blocks away. He'd already pulled enough cash from Dad's wallet to cover a ticket anywhere. I shook my head no. Running meant leaving him and Luke alone to absorb Mom's rage. She'd take it out on them. The curse obsession would consume her entirely once I wasn't there as a target anymore. Mason argued it was the only option, but I caught the fear flickering in his eyes. He knew exactly what Mom would do to him for helping me get out. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Mom was on her midnight patrol checking locks, sprinkling salt over doorways, mumbling protective prayers under her breath. Mason shoved me into the bathtub and yanked the curtain shut just as the bathroom door swung open. Mom stood there swaying, eyes unfocused. She stared at Mason for what felt like an eternity before shuffling off. We waited until her bedroom door clicked shut before I climbed back out of the tub. Mason held out the backpack again, and again I pushed it back. Not yet. Not until I knew the two of them would be safe. The next morning exploded into chaos. Mom hadn't slept at all. Her hair was matted with sweat, fingernails bloodied from clawing at invisible insects she swore the curse had sent. She forced Dad and the boys to search the entire house again while she ran burning sage cleansing rituals that filled every room with smoke. I hid in the attic crawl space Mason had shown me earlier, peering through cracks in the floorboards as Mom unraveled further. She accused Dad of hiding me, hurled his bourbon bottles against the wall. She grabbed Luke and shook him until he admitted sobbing that he'd seen something move in a shadow somewhere. Just my imagination, he cried. But Mom took it as confirmation I was still in the house. She tore Mason's room apart next, convinced he was sheltering me, ripping posters down, dumping every drawer, slicing his mattress open with a kitchen knife. When Mason tried to stop her, she backhanded him hard enough to send him crashing into his bookshelf. Books rained down around him while Mom shrieked about demon sympathizers and contamination spreading through the house. Dad finally stepped in, grabbing Mom's wrists as she raised the knife a second time. She spun on him instead, spitting accusations, blaming him for dooming the whole family by fathering me with someone else. That part was news to me. I'd always assumed I was simply theirs, just born somehow wrong. But Mom's ranting cracked open the real story. Dad's affair, the other woman who died giving birth to me, the baby he'd carried home in a drunken haze, talking his already unwell wife into hiding his shame in a basement. The truth sent Dad stumbling straight for more bourbon. Mom collapsed onto Mason's destroyed mattress, sobbing, ripping at her own hair. Luke huddled in a corner. Mason sat among the wreckage of his belongings, eyes completely hollow. All of it was my fault, somehow. My existence had poisoned every corner of this family. That night I finally made my decision. If I stayed hidden, Mom would tear them apart looking for me. If I ran, she'd blame them for letting the curse escape. Mom was really earning some kind of award with her curse-tracking instincts. Nothing says devoted parent quite like turning your own house into a horror set where your daughter gets cast as the monster and your youngest gets recruited as a tiny ghost hunter. But if she actually caught me, if she got to perform whatever ritual she believed would finally break the curse, maybe she'd settle down. Maybe everyone could finally get some peace. I crept down from the attic once the house went quiet. My legs had gained a little strength over 2 days of forced movement, though stairs still nearly defeated me. I made for the kitchen, planning to grab something to eat before showing myself in the morning. Let Mom catch me with food and handproof, in her mind that the curse made me steal from them. But Mom was already sitting there, alone in the dark at the kitchen table. She didn't move when I walked in. Didn't even glance up. I froze in the doorway, bracing for her scream of discovery. Instead, she spoke in that eerily calm voice that meant the medication was finally doing its job. She asked if I was hungry, asked if I wanted milk and cookies, the kind she used to bake for Mason and Luke. The sheer normalcy of it scared me more than her ranting ever had. I crept closer, ready to run if she lunged, but she only slid a plate across the table and poured milk into a glass. We sat together in silence while I ate, her watching me with sad eyes that almost looked sane again. She told me she knew, deep down, I wasn't really a demon. The voices lied to her sometimes, she admitted, but I was still dangerous. Still cursed. Not my fault, Dad's. His sin had marked me, made me wrong from the start. Keeping me locked away was the only way to protect Mason and Luke. She was sorry about the basement, she said, but what other choice had she had? I wanted to argue to make her see reason, but I recognized this particular calm, the lull right before her mind shattered again. If I played along, maybe she'd just lock me back up without taking it out on the others. So I nodded. Agreed, I understood. Yes, I'd go back downstairs. Yes, I'd stay quiet. Yes, I knew she was only protecting everyone. Mom smiled and reached across the table to touch my face. Her hand was ice cold. She said tomorrow was my birthday, my 5th real one. Something significant happens on 5s, she said. The curse would be at its strongest, but also its most fragile. She had a plan that would fix everything. A plan to make me clean enough to finally live upstairs like a real daughter. Alarm bells went off in my head immediately. I asked what kind of plan. Mom's smile stretched wider. She'd been doing research, reading. There were old methods for breaking curses, blood methods. It would hurt, but only briefly. Then I'd be free, and we could finally be a real family. I yanked away from her touch. For 1 second, something dangerous flashed in Mom's eyes before the false calm slid back into place. She said I was scared. That was understandable. But didn't I want to be normal? Didn't I want to stop hurting everyone around me? Tomorrow at midnight, the moment February 29th officially began, she would save me. Save all of us. She stood and gestured toward the basement door. Time to go back, she said. Just one more day. I could survive one more day, couldn't I? For Mason and Luke's sake? I knew bolting would set her off completely, so I walked toward the basement door, each step feeling heavier than the last. Mom trailed close behind, humming some lullaby I recognized from years of hearing it through the vents. The door stood open, waiting. The darkness inside seemed almost alive, breathing. She said old ways. But I wasn't that same girl who'd survived 16 years trapped in that darkness anymore. 2 days of freedom had changed something fundamental in me. My eyes had finally tasted sunlight. My legs had climbed actual stairs. My mind had gotten a glimpse of hope. I refused to wait passively for whatever horror Mom had planned next. The basement had one small window, painted black and boarded shut. I'd never once tried breaking through it before. I'd simply accepted my own imprisonment. But now I attacked those boards with everything I had, using the toilet tank lid as a battering tool. Splinters flew, my knuckles split open, but I kept swinging. Upstairs, Mom was singing loud enough, maybe deliberately, to drown out the noise. Or maybe she wanted me to escape. Maybe this was somehow part of her twisted plan, releasing the curse so she could properly hunt it down. I stopped caring about her logic entirely. I just needed out. The first board snapped free. Moonlight spilled through the gap, the first natural light to ever touch this prison in 16 years. I worked faster, ignoring the blood on my hands. Another board gave way. The opening was small, but after years of starvation, so was I. Footsteps thundered above me. Multiple sets. Mom had woken everyone, was already laying out tomorrow's plan. Mason's voice rose in protest. A slap cut him off. Dad's slurred attempts to calm things down joined in. Luke was crying again. The final board refused to budge. I slammed my whole body into it. Felt it crack but hold firm. Above me, footsteps moved toward the basement door. Mom coming to verify her sacrifice hadn't slipped away. One last desperate shove and the board finally splintered apart. I squeezed through the gap, skin tearing against broken wood and glass shards. The backyard opened up before me, enormous and terrifying. I'd never once been outside at night, never felt grass under bare feet or wind against my face. The basement door rattled violently. Mom's furious scream tore through the house when she discovered the empty room. I ran or tried to. My legs failed after 10 steps, and I crawled the rest of the way across the lawn. aiming for the fence. Behind me, the back door slammed open. Mom stood framed in the doorway, hair wild, nightgown whipping in the wind. She was holding something, the knife from Mason's room, but she wasn't chasing me. Instead, she called out sweetly, begging me to come back. The ritual wouldn't work if I was scared, she said. I needed to trust her. She was my mother. She loved me. I reached the fence and tried climbing, but my weakened arms could barely lift me. Mom kept walking across the yard, still rambling about curses and love and sacrifice, about the hard choices required to protect the people who mattered, about February 29th, and the strange magic of leap years. Mason appeared in the doorway behind her. He spotted the knife and broke into a run. Mom heard his footsteps, turned, and raised the blade not toward him, toward herself, pressed it flat against her own throat. She told me if I didn't come back, she'd take my place instead. The curse demanded blood. If not mine, then hers, and after her, Mason, then Luke, then Dad, one after another until the debt was settled. I released the fence and turned to face her fully. Mason had gone completely still, hands raised the way you'd approach a wild, unpredictable animal, which wasn't far from accurate. Dad stumbled out behind him, bourbon bottle still in hand, struggling to process what he was seeing. Luke peeked out from behind him, eyes huge with fear. Mom smiled at me, her special girl, her leap year baby. Come inside, she said. Let her fix everything. One small ritual and we'd finally be a normal family. She'd take her medication faithfully. Dad would stop drinking. The boys would have their sister back. All I had to do was trust her completely. I took one step toward her, then another. Mason shook his head desperately. But what other option did I have? Mom's grip on the knife stayed perfectly steady. She would do it, the voices in her head would absolutely make sure of that. But as I closed the distance, I noticed something different in her eyes. Not madness, fear. She was genuinely terrified of me, of everything I represented. Not a curse, not a demon proof of Dad's betrayal. Evidence she'd failed as a wife. A living, breathing reminder that her perfect family had always been a lie. I stopped just out of arm's reach. Mom's smile cracked. She pressed the blade harder into her throat, a thin line of blood beating up. Last chance, she said. Come willingly, or watch her die. Watch everyone die. The curse would claim every single person I'd tried so hard to protect. And that's when Luke did something nobody expected. He walked right past Dad, past Mason, straight up to Mom. Took her free hand in his small one. Told her I wasn't scary at all anymore. He'd been wrong before, he said. I was just a girl. His sister. Couldn't they just keep her? Mom looked down at him, certainty cracking into confusion. The knife wavered in her grip. Luke kept talking in that small, earnest voice about how lonely I must have been all those years. How brave I'd been just to survive. How he wanted to show me his toys and games. How we could finally all be a real family together. The knife slipped from Mom's hand and hit the grass. She dropped to her knees, pulling Luke into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The madness broke like a fever finally lifting, leaving her shaking and disoriented. Dad finally moved, kicking the knife away and helping her back to her feet. Mason rushed to me, draping his jacket over my shoulders. The four of us stood there in the moonlit backyard, a broken family trying to hold itself together. Mom clung to Dad and Luke, whispering apologies that made no coherent sense. I leaned my full weight against Mason, my legs no longer capable of holding me up alone. Nobody mentioned tomorrow. Nobody mentioned my birthday, or what would happen next. Dad half carried Mom back inside while Luke gripped her hand. Mason helped me follow, supporting nearly all my weight. The house felt different now, still a prison in some ways, but the locks were finally breaking. The walls were starting to crumble. The secrets were spilling out like blood from old wounds. Mom sat down at the kitchen table where she'd fed me cookies just hours before. Dad shook her medication into his palm and watched her swallow each pill, one by one. She kept glancing at me with bewildered, almost newborn eyes, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time, not a curse, not a demon, just a damaged girl she'd helped damage even further. Mason made sandwiches that nobody touched. Luke brought down one of his old stuffed animals and tucked it into my lap, such a small gesture, and it meant everything. Dad cracked open a fresh bottle but set it down untouched. We sat together in silence as the clock crept toward midnight, toward February 29th, toward my 5th real birthday. Mom finally broke the silence, her voice raw from crying. She asked for my name. In 16 years, she'd never once given me one. I was always just it, or the thing, or the curse. I had no answer for her. How do you name yourself when you've never technically existed? Mason suggested we figure it out together tomorrow. It struck me as a strange contradiction. Mom calm enough to offer cookies one moment, but still mentioning blood rituals to break curses the next. That kind of mix between normal motherly behavior and genuinely dangerous thinking left me wondering what was actually happening inside her head, especially on the one day I got to truly exist. Mom nodded slowly, the medication gradually smoothing her sharp edges. Dad agreed too, words a little slurred but clearly sincere. Luke mentioned he had a whole book of baby names back in his room. Midnight struck. February 29th officially began, my 5th birthday. I braced myself, waiting for Mom to remember her ritual, her blood-based plan, but she just sat staring down at her folded hands on the table. The voices are quiet, she said softly. For the first time in years, they're actually quiet. We stayed awake until dawn, not talking much, simply existing together in the same room. A family gathered around a table, doing their best impression of normal. When sunlight finally broke through the windows, it found all of us asleep right where we'd settled. I woke to the smell of pancakes cooking. Dad stood at the stove, sober for once, fumbling to remember the recipe. Mom sat exactly where we'd left her, but something had cleared in her eyes. She watched me like I was a small miracle instead of a mistake she'd buried. Luke bounced into the kitchen, clutching his name book, pages flagged with sticky notes full of options. Emma, he suggested, or Sophia, or Lily. Pretty names for a pretty sister. Mom flinched slightly at the word sister, but didn't correct him. Mason brought down a stack of clothes from the donation bag in the garage, real clothes that almost fit my frame. He helped me to the bathroom and stood guard outside while I took my very first proper shower. The hot water felt like actual magic against my skin. The soap smelled like freedom itself. When I came back down, Mom had already set 5 places at the table. 5 plates, 5 forks, 5 cups, a spot reserved for everyone. including me. She caught my eye and nodded toward an empty chair. My chair, at her table in her kitchen. We ate pancakes in a careful, cautious silence. Dad kept topping off the coffee cups. Luke rambled about school and friends and other ordinary things. Mason watched Mom closely for any sign of cracking, but she just sat there, occasionally studying me like I was some puzzle she couldn't quite solve. After breakfast, she asked if I wanted to see my actual birth certificate, the real one, not the death certificate they'd filed years ago. She'd kept it hidden away this entire time. Proof that I'd existed, even while she insisted otherwise. She pulled a small box out from her room, hands trembling slightly. Inside were old documents, photographs, a hospital bracelet. Evidence from my very first day alive, before the basement swallowed my whole world. The birth certificate listed a name I'd never once heard before. Grace. My birth mother had named me Grace before she died, before Dad brought me home to the woman who would eventually become his wife. Mom traced the paper gently with her fingertip. She said Grace was a good name. A strong one. Maybe I could keep it. Maybe we could all start fresh. She glanced at Dad as she said it, and he nodded in agreement. Mason squeezed my hand under the table. Luke asked if Grace meant I was supposed to be graceful, since I walked kind of funny. The innocent absurdity of the question made everyone laugh, fragile, careful laughter, but laughter all the same. Mom smiled, and for one brief flicker I caught a glimpse of who she might have been without the illness eating away at her, who she might still become again with the right help. The day unfolded strangely from there. Mom stuck to her medication schedule every 4 hours. Dad stayed completely sober. My brothers taught me small, ordinary things, how to use a computer, how video games worked, how to simply exist in spaces that weren't underground. My legs gained a little more strength with every hour of movement. But as evening crept in, Mom grew restless again. The voices were whispering again, she announced, reminding her of things, dangers, curses. She kept staring at me with mounting fear, her medication clearly losing ground against 16 years of entrenched delusion. Dad noticed it first. He gently suggested she rest, take an extra dose. But she shook her head firmly. The 29th was almost over. Tomorrow I would simply vanish again. That's how it worked for leap year babies, existing only on their designated day. She needed to put me back before midnight, or the curse would spread uncontrollably. Mason tried reasoning with her. Luke held tight to her hand. Dad pleaded with her to remember the progress we'd made together. But the illness was simply stronger than logic could compete with. She rose unsteadily and announced it was time. Time to head back downstairs. Time to be safe. Time to protect the real family from the imposter daughter. I could have run. My legs were finally strong enough now. But I caught sight of the knife block sitting just behind her, and I let go of the idea, reluctantly. The basement door. I turned back toward them. Mom stood there wringing her hands raw. Dad stood beside her, looking utterly defeated. Luke was crying yet again. Mason's fists had clenched into tight balls at his sides. My family. My broken, beautiful family. I told Mom that I forgave her. For the basement. For all the darkness. For every year spent being treated as nothing at all. I told her I understood she was sick, that the voices had lied to her, that she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. Her expression crumbled completely, and she rushed forward, pulling me into the very first hug of my entire life. She smelled like soap and something deeply sad underneath it. Her arms felt impossibly thin wrapped around me. She whispered apologies into my hair, over and over. Sorry, sorry, sorry. When she finally pulled back, her eyes looked genuinely clear, the real her, not the version the sickness controlled. She touched my face softly and said no. No more basement. No more hiding away. I was her daughter, Grace. I belonged upstairs with them. The clock chimed 11:30. 30 minutes left of February 29th. Of my birthday. Of my existence, according to her own delusion. Mom glanced at the clock, then back at me. I could see the voices screaming behind her eyes, but she turned away from the basement door anyway. We went into the living room instead, all 5 of us together, settling onto the couch like an actual family. Mom held my hand on one side, Mason held the other. Dad wrapped his arm around Mom. Luke curled into my other side. We watched the clock together, waiting. 11:45. Mom's grip on my hand tightened. The voices were getting louder, she whispered, telling her terrible things. What would happen the second midnight struck? How the curse would consume every one of us. How she'd failed completely to protect her real children from the imposter in her home. 11:50. Mom had started shaking visibly. Dad tried soothing her, but she pulled away from his touch. The medication had stopped holding the line. 16 years of entrenched delusion outweighed a handful of pills. She stood and began pacing the room. We all watched her tensely, waiting for the inevitable break. 11:55. Mom froze mid-pace, looked at me with wild, unfocused eyes, said she was sorry, so deeply sorry, but she couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk any of them. She started moving toward the kitchen, toward the knife block. Mason jumped up to intercept her. Dad followed close behind. Luke clung to my side, terrified. I sat frozen in place, watching my family fracture apart all over again. Mom screaming about curses and protection. Dad begging her to remember her medication. Mason physically blocking the kitchen entrance. 11:58. Mom broke free and bolted, not toward the kitchen, straight for the front door. She threw it open and stumbled out into the night. We all chased after her, calling her name. She stopped dead center in the middle of the street, arms spread wide, staring up at the sky. 11:59. Mom turned slowly back toward us. Her face had gone strangely peaceful. She said the voices had finally told her the truth. The only way to truly break the curse was to remove herself from the equation entirely. She was the actual poison, not me. Her illness had stolen 16 years from an innocent child, had turned her own family into prisoners trapped alongside her. She was the curse, and she alone could end it. The clock began chiming midnight. Mom smiled at me, called me Grace, told me she loved me. Then she spun and ran, not down the street but straight across it, toward the highway at the edge of our neighborhood. Dad took off after her, moving faster than I'd ever seen a drunk man move. Mason grabbed both me and Luke, holding us back by force. We heard the screech of tires braking hard, Dad's shout, Then total silence. March 1st arrived. I was still here. The curse, in whatever sense it had ever existed, was broken, but at a cost none of us had ever imagined paying. We stood frozen in our broken home's doorway, waiting for sirens, waiting for Dad to come back, waiting for Mom, somehow already understanding that only one of them actually would. Mason held the two of us tighter. Luke buried his face against my shoulder. I stared out at the empty street, wondering whether this counted as freedom or just a different shape of prison entirely, whether survival always demanded someone else's fall, whether love could ever exist without some kind of sacrifice attached to it. The sirens eventually arrived. Dad eventually came back, supported on either side by paramedics. Mom never came back. The leap year baby had made it through her 5th birthday alive, but the family that had spent 16 years hiding her away no longer existed in the same form. In its place stood something new, fragile, uncertain, but undeniably real. We went back inside to wait for the police, to answer their questions, to figure out whatever came next. 5 chairs surrounded that table, but only 4 people remained to sit in them. The empty seat seemed to stare back at us accusingly, Mom's final gift, her last act of protection. She'd removed herself entirely from the equation, leaving the rest of us to figure out the remainder on our own. Police arrived within minutes, their questions careful and procedural. Dad explained the basics, while Mason kept Luke and me settled in the living room. The officers took notes, made phone calls, arranged transport to get Dad to the hospital. Standard protocol for what they ultimately classified as a mental health crisis that ended in tragedy. Child services arrived the following morning, a tired-looking woman with genuinely kind eyes, sitting at our kitchen table asking gentle, careful questions. Dad had sobered up enough by then to answer everything coherently. Mason spoke for all of us whenever needed. Luke held tight to my hand throughout the entire interview. The woman examined my birth certificate, the death certificate Mom had filed years earlier, and the medical records Dad eventually produced from a hidden folder. She made several calls, consulted with her supervisors, typed endless notes into her laptop. By that afternoon, she'd arranged emergency custody paperwork, medical evaluations, and referrals for trauma counseling. Grace really was quite a fitting name for someone who'd survived 16 years fed through a slot in a door. Mom had shown real flashes of clarity in between the medication doses, and the self-imposed midnight pressure cooker of her own making. The following weeks blurred together into a haze of appointments and adjustments. Doctors marveled at my physical condition given 16 years of total confinement. Malnutrition had permanently stunted my growth, left my bones brittle and my muscles weak. Physical therapy 3 times weekly. Nutritionist consultations. Blood tests revealing vitamin deficiencies that would take months to fully correct. Dad cleared every bottle out of the house not dramatically, just quietly bagging them up one morning while we all ate breakfast together. He started attending meetings at the community center, coming home smelling like coffee instead of bourbon. His hands shook for days afterward, but he kept pushing through it. Mason went back to school but struggled badly to focus. Teachers sent notes home about his slipping grades, his withdrawn demeanor. He'd sit with me in my room after dinner each night, helping me prepare for the educational assessment tests the state required. 16 years of teaching myself had left strange, uneven gaps in my knowledge. I could dissect complex literature but had never once seen basic math. Luke, surprisingly, adapted the fastest of anyone. He brought friends over to meet his new sister, casually explaining I'd been sick but was better now. Kids accepted that explanation far more easily than adults would have. He taught me playground games in the backyard, patient whenever my coordination failed me. The house felt fundamentally different without Mom in it. Her absence had a physical weight to it, a mom-shaped hole sitting in every single room. Dad packed up her belongings slowly, one box at a time. Some days he'd just stop mid-fold, staring at a dress or an old photograph, lost somewhere in memories of who she'd been before the illness took hold of everything. I found her old medication bottles stashed all over the house behind books, inside shoeboxes, tucked beneath bathroom sinks. Evidence of her own quiet, losing battle to stay well, to fight off voices that ultimately won in the end. Dad flushed every single one, jaw tight with old anger tangled up in fresh grief. Physical recovery happened slowly. First, walking to the mailbox without stopping. Then around the block, with either Mason or Dad always positioned beside me, ready to catch me whenever my legs gave way. Neighbors occasionally stared, recognizing Dad and the boys but visibly confused by the pale girl who moved like someone decades older. The story we settled on was simple. I'd been sick, hospitalized for years, finally well enough to come home. People accepted it readily, because the actual alternative was too horrifying to even consider. The nice family in the yellow house surely couldn't have kept a child locked in their basement. That sort of thing only happened in horror movies. Summer arrived with its own set of challenges. Sunlight burned my pale skin within minutes and hurt my eyes badly. We bought sunglasses, long sleeves, industrial-strength sunscreen. I slowly built tolerance for daylight in careful, measured increments, like some kind of reverse vampire. Dad landed a job at a warehouse early morning shifts that covered our basic expenses. He came home tired every night but completely sober, pride replacing years of buried shame in his eyes. Mason got a part-time job at the grocery store, saving toward a college education he'd once assumed was completely out of reach. I started online schooling, using a laptop the state had provided. The screen hurt my eyes at first, the sheer rush of information overwhelming after years spent in near total silence. But learning became something I genuinely craved. Every completed lesson felt like proof I was something more than just the ghost from the basement. The house slowly transformed around us. Dad painted over the old water stains on the ceiling. Mason repaired the broken steps. Luke helped me decorate my own room, the very first real bedroom I'd ever had. We hung posters, arranged his old outgrown stuffed animals, built a space that genuinely belonged to Grace instead of the nameless girl who used to live below us. Some nights were rougher than others. I'd wake up screaming from nightmares of walls closing in around me, of endless darkness pressing down. Dad would find me curled in a corner, counting imaginary scratches on imaginary walls. He'd sit with me until sunrise, not speaking, simply staying present until the panic finally subsided. Mason carried a guilt that ate at him constantly, like acid eating through metal. He'd known about me for 9 years and could have freed me at any point. The weight of those lost years bowed his shoulders, aged his face prematurely. No amount of reassurance ever seemed to lift that burden fully. Some wounds simply don't heal cleanly. Luke had his own nightmares too. The basement door featured heavily, along with Mom's wild eyes and the knife pressed against her own throat. He'd crawl into my bed after particularly bad dreams, needing physical proof that I still existed. We'd lie awake together, inventing stories about boring, ordinary families, mothers who simply took their pills like they were supposed to. Fall brought a new wave of challenges. School registration for the upcoming year, immunization records that didn't exist anywhere, a social security number that had been officially flagged as deceased. Dad spent hours on the phone, filling out endless forms, proving to bureaucrats moving at a glacial pace that I was, in fact, alive. The basement stayed sealed shut. Dad had boarded it up the very day after Mom died, declaring it permanently off limits. But I could still feel it down there, breathing beneath us, holding 16 years of scratched walls and accumulated darkness. Some days, the pull to go back down there nearly overwhelmed me to count the marks again, to remember, to prove to myself it had genuinely happened. Mason caught me standing at that door once, hammer in hand. He didn't bother asking why. He just took the tool from me and suggested we go for a walk instead. We made it 3 blocks before my legs finally gave out, but even that counted as progress. Everything counted as progress when you were starting completely from nothing. Dad joined a grief support group at the community center. He never talked about what got discussed there, but he always came home looking lighter somehow. The deep lines etched around his eyes gradually softened. He started cooking again, dredging up old recipes from before Mom got sick, before everything had collapsed. Winter rolled in with its own fresh anxieties. Darkness arrived earlier and lingered later, too familiar, too close to the basement's permanent night. We strung up lights everywhere, kept lamps burning constantly in every room. The electric bill tripled, but Dad paid it without a single complaint. Light had become a kind of medicine now. I turned 17 that December, my very first birthday that didn't fall on February 29th. Dad baked a cake, Mason hung up streamers, Luke invited his friends over. A completely ordinary party, for a girl who'd never once been ordinary. When everyone sang happy birthday, I cried over everything I'd missed and everything still waiting ahead of me. My therapist explained that trauma recovery doesn't move in a straight line. Good days and bad days were both perfectly normal. Healing happened in spirals, not clean linear progress. She gave me coping strategies, grounding techniques, ways to exist in a world that still felt impossibly big and bright and loud all at once. Mason graduated high school with honors nobody had predicted. Dad cried through the entire ceremony, pride finally outweighing the grief, if only for that one day. Luke performed in the winter concert, his voice clear and strong. I sat between them in the auditorium, marveling at the sheer ordinariness of the whole thing. Christmas arrived with careful, deliberate joy. We decorated a modest tree, hung stockings, attempted something resembling normal. Dad stayed sober through the family gatherings Mom had always hosted herself. Relatives asked about her in hushed, careful tones. The story we gave them was heart attack sudden, tragic, far easier to say out loud than the truth. January brought college applications for Mason. He settled on engineering practical, promising. He worked on his essays at the kitchen table, asking my opinion on word choices along the way. I helped wherever I could, proud of the brother who'd risked absolutely everything to set me free. My physical therapy eventually graduated into a regular gym membership, treadmills, weight machines, building real strength in careful, measured increments. Other members tended to avoid the skeletal girl who moved so cautiously through the space. I didn't mind much. Invisibility felt far safer than being noticed. Dad met someone through his grief group, a widow named Vicky who'd lost her husband to cancer. She came over for dinner one night, nervous, but kind. Luke chattered straight through the entire meal while Mason and I watched Dad smile in ways we'd nearly forgotten he was even capable of. February approached again, carrying that same old familiar dread. My body remembered even when my mind tried hard to forget. The 28th arrived with phantom walls pressing in around me, darkness crowding the edges of my vision. Dad found me in the bathroom at 3 a.m., scratching at the tile grout, counting all the way up to 1,461, but February 29th simply never came. It wasn't a leap year. The first March 1st in 4 years where I didn't have to exist by anyone's twisted rules, where I could simply be. Dad made pancakes anyway, starting a brand new tradition, celebrating ordinary days because we'd lost far too many of them already. Spring returned alongside genuine, measurable progress. I passed my GED exam on the very first attempt. Mason got accepted into state university with a partial scholarship. Luke made the baseball team. Dad and Vicky grew closer, slowly and carefully. Life accumulated in small, steady victories. The basement door stayed sealed shut the entire time. Some days I forgot it was even still there. Other days it tugged at me like gravity itself. But I remained upstairs, where the light lived, where the family gathered, where Grace got to practice existing every single day instead of just once every leap year. 1 year after Mom died, we held a small, quiet memorial. Not for the woman who'd locked me away, but for the mother she'd been before the illness stole away her mind entirely. Dad shared stories from their early years together. Mason remembered old bedtime songs. Luke talked about cookies and hugs. I just listened, learning about the stranger whose absence had somehow shaped my entire life. Pizza eaten straight off the floor really does taste different once you've spent 16 years eating meals pushed through a slot in a door. Grace is out here now, genuinely living her best life.